My name is Emily Mercer. I'm 32 years old, and the night my father called me uneducated trash, I did not cry, beg, or defend myself. I just stood there at the end of his birthday dinner table while everyone else froze, and watched him spit words at me like I was something filthy he wanted scraped off his floor. He told me I was a lowlife. He told me my money did not make me respectable. He told me to get out of his house. The wild part was that I had spent years quietly helping that family survive emergencies they never knew I had paid for. By then, I had already built a business that had made me $31 million, but in that room, none of that mattered. To them, I was still the daughter who had left college, ruined the family script, and chosen a life they could not control. So I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Okay, fine." Then I picked up my purse and walked out without raising my voice once. I was gone before anyone found the courage to stop me. By sunrise, I had packed my life into boxes, turned my phone face down, and left Indianapolis behind without saying goodbye. 3 weeks later, the same people who watched me get thrown out would be choking on the truth they had mocked, and for the first time in my life, I would not need their approval to breathe. Before I tell you what he said next, and what happened after I disappeared without a word, tell me what time it is, where you are, and where you're watching from. I really want to see how far this story travels tonight. I grew up in Indianapolis in a house where achievement only counted if it looked traditional from the outside. My father, Richard Mercer, was a mechanical engineer who had spent most of his life at the same industrial firm, and he treated that consistency like proof of moral superiority. My mother, Helen, taught middle school English and had a softer voice, but she reinforced the exact same rules with a smile instead of a shout. My older brother Ryan followed formulas the way some people follow religion. My sister Brooke learned early how to say the right thing in the right room and make adults call her mature. I was the one who made everyone uncomfortable. At 10, I wasn't playing house in the backyard. I was turning our garage into a mini Saturday market, repainting old stools, bundling thrift store dishes into sets, and convincing neighbors to buy them because I wrote handwritten tags that made each chipped bowl sound like history instead of damage. At 13, I was teaching local crafters how to photograph their products better so they could sell online. At 16, I was building simple checkout pages for women who sold candles, embroidered linens, and handmade soaps from county fair booths. I loved figuring out how people bought things, why stories sold better than specifications, why presentation changed value. My father called all of it cute little hustles, the same way some men pat a child on the head before ignoring her completely. He would stand in the kitchen after dinner and tell me, over and over, that cleverness without credentials was just a hobby with better lighting. My mother would say he only wanted security for me. What she meant was obedience. When Ryan got an internship, we celebrated with steak. When Brooke got top marks, my parents called grandparents. When I made enough money at 17 to cover my own car insurance and buy my laptop outright, my father barely looked up from the newspaper. He said, "That energy would be more impressive if you aimed it at a real future." I enrolled in college because fighting them felt more exhausting than disappointing myself. I lasted 3 semesters. Every class felt like someone describing business through glass while I was already bleeding on the other side of it. Professors talked about risk in theory. I was already taking it. They lectured about customer psychology from slides. I had already learned the hard way that women bought handmade kitchen goods differently at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday than they did at a Sunday market with cash in hand. I wasn't lazy, I was misaligned. But in my house, there was no distinction. The day I told my father I was leaving school, he looked at me the way a judge looks at someone who has wasted the court's time. He did not ask what I planned to build. He asked what kind of humiliation I wanted to bring to the family. He said I was choosing struggle because I was too arrogant to accept structure. He said no one respectable would ever trust a dropout with serious money or serious responsibility. My mother cried, not because she thought I might fail, but because she thought people would talk. Ryan laughed when I said I could make more with one smart business than with a lifetime of pretending. Brooke told me I was romanticizing instability because I wanted special treatment for being different. I left anyway. I rented a dim upstairs apartment over a laundromat on the east side, worked until my wrists hurt, learned shipping rules, chargebacks, ad fatigue, packaging costs, and client panic at 2 in the morning. And do you know what hurt the most? It wasn't being broke. It was realizing my family would have preferred to see me miserable in a respectable way than brave in a way they didn't understand. Have you ever felt like the people who claimed they were protecting you were really trying to bury the version of you they couldn't control? The business that eventually changed my life did not arrive as one clean idea. It came from years of watching talented people fail because they could make beautiful things but had no infrastructure, no pricing strategy, no fulfillment system, and no one teaching them how to scale without losing themselves. I spent my early 20s building storefronts, negotiating shipping discounts, photographing products on borrowed backdrops, and sleeping next to inventory towers because I couldn't afford a warehouse yet. I met my mentor, Elena Vasquez, at a regional trade expo in Louisville when I was 23 and trying not to look desperate. She had spent years as a buyer for boutique retail chains, and she saw in 10 minutes what my family had refused to see for a decade. I wasn't scattered. I was commercial. I wasn't unserious. I was early. Elena helped me stop thinking like a freelancer and start thinking like an operator. Together, we shaped my work into something larger, a commerce and logistics company that helped small American home goods makers, textile artists, woodworkers, ceramic studios, and specialty food brands build premium direct-to-consumer businesses without getting swallowed by giant marketplaces. I handled systems, brand strategy, packaging standards, customer retention, wholesale relationships, and eventually software tools built for our own sellers. I was not reselling trinkets online. I was building an ecosystem. It nearly broke me anyway. I maxed out a credit line once and paid it off in 6 brutal months. I lost a holiday season to a freight issue that wiped out my margins. I spent one entire winter wearing gloves indoors because I had chosen payroll over heat. But every setback taught me something useful, and none of those lessons came with a syllabus. They came with invoices, insomnia, and responsibility. By 28, I had a real headquarters, 41 employees, national distribution partners, and a platform that analysts kept trying to categorize too narrowly because they could not see how much of our value lived in the systems behind the storefront. By 30, I had turned down 2 buyout offers because I wanted control more than headlines. By 32, my personal stake in the company had made me $31 million. I still did not tell my family the real numbers. I told myself I was protecting the relationship, but the truth was uglier. Some part of me still wanted them to choose me before success made me undeniable. So I kept showing up small in rooms where I carried the largest burden. When my mother needed surgery and insurance stalled part of the bill, a trust account suddenly resolved the problem. When Ryan came up short on a house purchase, mysterious funds appeared through a family friend of a family friend. When Brooke's wedding nearly collapsed after vendor costs jumped, the shortfall vanished before she had to cancel anything. My father once called himself the backbone of the family while unknowingly driving a car I had paid to repair. That was the kind of silence I lived in. I would send help at noon and be treated like the cautionary tale by dinner. The deepest cut came when Ryan mentioned wanting to start a side business advising local contractors on property financing. I offered to show him how to build lead funnels and client nurture systems that actually converted. He smirked and said he wasn't going to take business advice from someone who quit college and got lucky on the internet. My father actually nodded. He said, "A degree teaches discipline. That matters more than hustle." I remember smiling as if it didn't hurt because by then I was fluent in swallowing humiliation whole. But silence does something dangerous when you feed it for years. It hardens into distance, then resentment, then clarity. I told myself my restraint was love. I told myself dignity meant taking the high road. I told myself family deserved patience. I was wrong. My silence was not healing anything. It was simply making the disrespect cheaper for them. And then my father's 60th birthday arrived, and I made the mistake of thinking maybe truth, finally spoken plainly, would change everything. I went to that dinner with a gift I had spent months planning. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't revenge. It was a fully funded retirement account package structured through my financial team so my parents could stop worrying about medical surprises and stop pretending stress was noble. I also carried a private hope I'm almost embarrassed to admit now. I thought if I showed them what I had really built, calmly, clearly, without theatrics, they might finally see me as I was, instead of who I had been at 19. The dinner started exactly the way family humiliations usually start, with everyone acting normal enough that you question your instincts. My mother fussed over the roast. Brooke talked about a case her firm had won. Ryan kept inserting banking jargon into ordinary conversation because he loved sounding expensive. My father sat at the head of the table basking in the kind of authority that only survives if nobody challenges it. No one asked me a real question. Not about work. Not about my life. Not about why I looked thinner, sharper, more tired, more certain. I waited through dessert, then set the envelope beside my father's plate and said I wanted to share something. He opened it slowly, frowned at the figures, and asked what exactly he was looking at. I explained, as simply as I could, that my company had crossed another major valuation milestone, that I had structured something for their future, and that I wanted them to be comfortable because I loved them. The room went dead quiet. Ryan was the first to laugh, and it wasn't a happy sound. He asked if this was one of those fake internet-rich things where people brag about paper value and leased cars. Brooke said, "Emily, please don't make Dad's birthday about your brand." My father stared at the documents like they offended him personally. Then he asked, with this thin disgust in his voice, whether I thought throwing money around made me equal to people who had actually done life the right way. I said it wasn't about equality, it was about care. I said I had been helping for years, quietly, because I never wanted anyone to feel exposed. That was when everything detonated. My mother looked at me first, confused. Ryan went pale, then angry. Brooke demanded to know what I meant. I should have stopped. Instead, maybe because I was tired of being the family secret. Maybe because some old wound finally tore open, I told them. Not every number, not every detail, but enough. I said I had covered part of Mom's medical expenses, helped Ryan close on his house, rescued Brooke's wedding when nobody else knew how close it had come to collapsing. I did not say it to shame them. I said it because I wanted, for once, the truth to exist in the room. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. He didn't look grateful. He looked cornered. That was the moment I understood that some people would rather call you cruel than admit they've needed you. Ryan asked if I thought this made him some kind of charity case. Brooke said I was manipulative for saving things over their heads. My mother cried and kept saying she didn't understand why I would do all of that in secret, as if the answer had not been sitting at the head of the table my whole life. Then my father started shouting. He said I had walked into his house to buy authority. He said money made by a dropout would never impress him. He said I had no right to make people with real educations feel small. Ryan joined in. Brooke did too. They laughed at my little empire, mocked my lack of credentials, acted like the company employing dozens of people and supporting hundreds of makers was some elaborate fluke that embarrassed them by association. I kept my voice, calm. That seemed to enrage my father more. He pointed at the door and said, "You are still uneducated trash with good timing." Then louder, because cruelty always performs for an audience, he yelled, "Get out of my house, you lowlife, and don't come back here acting like money makes you one of us." One of us. As if I had ever truly been allowed to be. I remember picking up my purse. I remember my hands being perfectly steady even though my chest felt hollowed out. I remember looking at each face one last time. My mother stared at the table. Brooke looked ashamed, but silent. Ryan actually looked pleased, like something ugly and long-nursed in him had finally won. I looked at my father and said, "Okay, fine." That was it. No speech, no tears, no begging for anyone in the room to defend me. I walked out. In the driveway, I sat in my car for nearly 2 minutes without starting it. I did not cry right away. I just stared through the windshield and felt something inside me go cold and clean. Not broken, finished. By the time I pulled away from the curb, I had already made the decision. I would not spend another year auditioning for love in a family that only respected me when I was smaller than they were. I drove to my condo, packed until dawn, deleted the group chat, boxed every family photo I owned, left my old house key on the kitchen counter, and by morning I was on the road to Charleston. I did not send a letter. I did not explain myself. 3 weeks later, they would learn that my silence was not weakness. It was the sound of a door locking behind them. Charleston did not heal me overnight. It gave me room to stop performing. I had quietly bought a restored coastal cottage there the year before as an investment property, a place I had told myself I might use someday when life got less crowded. I arrived with boxes, exhaustion, and a fury so controlled it almost felt elegant. The first thing I did was strip the house of anything that looked borrowed. I took down generic artwork, unpacked handmade pieces from sellers I had worked with for years, and filled the kitchen with objects made by people who built things with their hands instead of opinions with their mouths. Then I did something small and almost childish. I deleted every family photo from my phone and burned a cardboard box of old birthday cards and graduation notes in a metal fire pit behind the house. Not because I hated them, because I needed the ritual. I needed one physical moment that said this version of me was over. I started sleeping through the night for the first time in months. I walked the neighborhood before sunrise. I adopted a rescue dog with one torn ear and named her June. I leased a downtown studio where I began hosting small workshops for makers and women, building product businesses outside the usual gate-kept paths. The first one was supposed to be 12 people. 47 showed up. Some came for strategy. Some came because they had been told they were unrealistic so many times they no longer trusted their own ambition. I understood every face in that room. Then Ryan showed up at my front door on a humid Saturday afternoon exactly 3 weeks after I left Indianapolis. He was wearing the same superior expression he always wore when he thought he could turn charm into leverage, but there was stress around his eyes now. He did not apologize. He opened with family. He said Dad had been under pressure, that birthdays make people emotional, that maybe I had taken it too personally. Then he pivoted almost seamlessly into why he had really come. A real estate deal had gone bad. He needed money fast. Just a bridge loan, he said, a temporary thing between siblings. I asked whether he had driven 11 hours to apologize or to collect. He didn't like that. He started talking about blood, history, loyalty, all the words people use when they want access without accountability. Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was my CFO on speaker because I had been reviewing a contract all morning. Ryan heard me confirm terms on a 7-figure licensing agreement and approve the first stage of a multi-state expansion. I didn't lower my voice. I didn't send the call to voicemail. I didn't perform modesty for him anymore. When I ended the call, he was staring at me like he had finally met a stranger wearing my face. I told him no. Not no for now. No. No loans. No emergency rescues. No more private funding for people who publicly degraded me and privately counted on my silence. He said Dad had been right about me all along, that success had made me selfish. I told him success had not changed me. It had simply made it impossible for people like him to keep pretending I owed them everything while deserving nothing. He left angry, humiliated, and more shaken than he wanted me to see. Later, I learned he drove straight back to Indianapolis and told everyone what he had heard. The house, the deal, the money, the fact that I had far more than they had ever imagined. That conversation was the first crack in the myth they had built about me. It also became the beginning of their consequences. A month later, Charleston made me visible in a way my hometown never had. A regional business journal ran a feature on my workshops, the company's growth, and the unconventional route I had taken to build it. The piece was sharp enough to be flattering and honest enough to sting. It described how some of the most innovative founders were often dismissed by the people closest to them because they did not come wrapped in the right credentials. It mentioned, without naming names, that family skepticism can become a form of sabotage when pride matters more than perception. That article got picked up by a larger publication. Then a podcast clipped part of the interview. Then an entrepreneurship newsletter quoted me saying, "The people who love you are not always the people who know how to see you." By the second week, the story had circled back to Indianapolis. Suddenly, old classmates were sending messages. Distant cousins who had ignored me for years were reacting to headlines. And my family, who had treated my path like an embarrassment, found themselves standing in the middle of a narrative they could no longer control. The fallout hit each of them differently. My father's engineering firm had spent years talking publicly about innovation and future talent, while privately rewarding the same narrow image of success he worshipped. After the article spread locally, coworkers started sending it around with comments about how impressive it was that someone from that Mercer family had built something so large without a degree. Men who had listened to my father lecture for years about discipline and traditional paths began asking him, half joking and half not, whether he still thought college was the only respectable route. My father did what proud men do when truth embarrasses them. He got louder before he got smaller. He snapped at a younger manager in a meeting after she praised non-traditional hiring. He lost his temper in the cafeteria when someone mentioned my interview. Within 2 months, he was advised to take an early retirement package after a stress-related breakdown that everyone in Indianapolis understood was really humiliation in a nicer suit. Ryan's consequences were more practical and almost more satisfying. He had apparently been using my name at the bank, hinting to clients and supervisors that he had special access to my company and could bring in business relationships if he got moved into a better portfolio role. Once it became obvious we were not speaking and that he had exaggerated those connections, compliance got involved. He lost the promotion he had been chasing and got formally written up for misrepresentation. That story traveled faster than he expected. A few relatives who had always treated him like the golden son suddenly stopped answering his calls when he pitched ideas. Brooke took the first real step toward adulthood out of all of them. She sent me a voice note, not a performance, not a half apology buried under excuses. She said, "I knew Dad was wrong that night, and I stayed silent because I didn't want him to turn on me too. I am ashamed of that. You deserved a sister, and I acted like a spectator." I listened to it 3 times because sincerity had become so rare I needed to hear it more than once to trust it. And then came the twist that almost felt fictional until I saw the email myself. The industrial firm where my father had worked for 35 years was sponsoring a regional summit on manufacturing, innovation, and workforce futures. One of the younger directors had seen my feature, researched my company, and invited me to give the keynote on building high-growth systems outside traditional educational pathways. The title they proposed made me laugh out loud in my kitchen. Success Beyond the Credential. My father would not only hear about it, he would have to watch the company he had devoted his life to celebrate the exact kind of daughter he had thrown out of his house. My mother started calling then. First softly, then urgently, then almost daily. She said the family needed to heal. She said Dad had been under pressure. She said Ryan was struggling. She said Brooke missed me. She said things had gotten out of hand. She never once led with what actually mattered. Not until I stopped answering. Then the text finally came. Your father says he was wrong. Not sorry he was embarrassed. Not sorry things got public. Wrong. That word arrived late, but it arrived. I told her there would be no private reset, no pretending, no family dinner where everyone used softer voices and called that accountability. If they wanted any relationship with me at all, they would have to tell the truth plainly and publicly, first to themselves, then to the people they had misled. My mother agreed too quickly. That told me how desperate they had become. I accepted the keynote. I booked the flight back to Indianapolis. And for the first time in my life, I was not returning to prove anything. I was returning because the truth had finally grown large enough that nobody could make it kneel. The summit took place in a polished downtown convention hall, with the logos of legacy companies hanging from banners like old men reminding each other they still mattered. When I arrived backstage, Brooke was already there waiting for me in a navy suit, looking less certain than I had ever seen her. She hugged me once I allowed it, then stepped back, like she knew she had not earned comfort yet. She told me Ryan was in trouble at work, that Dad had barely left the house since taking the retirement package, that Mom had spent weeks trying to figure out how to explain to relatives that the family story they had all told about me was a lie. Then she handed me her phone. You should know, she said. The screen showed a family group video call from the week before. My aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone who had quietly absorbed the version of me my parents had curated for years. In the recording, my mother admitted they had judged me unfairly, minimized my work, and allowed my father's pride to turn into cruelty. Then my father, stiff and visibly miserable, said the words I had once thought I needed. He said he had insulted the daughter who had supported the family more than any of them knew. He said he had confused education with worth. He said he had been wrong. It was not elegant. It was not redemptive. It was not enough to erase anything. But it was public, and it was real. I handed Brooke's phone back and thanked her for making them do it without me in the room. That was the first boundary I had set that no one dared test. When I walked onto that stage, I saw him immediately. Richard Mercer, front section, shoulders squared too hard, wearing the expression of a man trapped between shame and stubbornness. Ryan sat beside my mother, smaller than I remembered, like the world had finally stopped cushioning him. Brooke took a seat near the aisle. The moderator introduced me as a founder, systems strategist, and national voice for non-traditional entrepreneurship. There was a line about job creation, a line about impact, a line about redefining what credibility looks like. My father did not clap at first. Then people around him did, and the sound dragged his hands together almost against his will. I stood at the podium and looked out at a room full of executives, students, operators, and people who had built their lives in both approved and unapproved ways. I had written a careful speech on the plane. I abandoned half of it in the first minute. I told them that talent does not always arrive carrying the paperwork we expect. I told them that some of the most capable people in the country are dismissed early because they do not fit a script designed by fear. I said that credentials matter, training matters, discipline matters. But none of those things mean anything if they become excuses to deny dignity to people whose path looks different. Then I said the line that made the room go completely still. A person's value is revealed long before their resume impresses you. The real test of character is how you treat them, before you know what they can do for you. I didn't look directly at my father when I said it, but I didn't need to. The silence around him answered for me. By the time I finished, the audience was on its feet. Not because I had won, not because revenge tastes sweetest in applause, but because truth, when finally spoken without apology, has a physical force to it. It changes the temperature of a room. After the keynote, the director who had invited me over introduced me to several executives, and then, with a cruelty so polite it almost counted as art, said to my father, "You must be incredibly proud." That was the moment Richard broke, not in a dramatic collapse, in something sadder. His face lost its structure. His voice went thin. He asked if we could talk privately. We stepped into a side corridor away from the crowd, though not far enough that he could retreat into fantasy. My mother followed. Ryan hung back. Brooke stood near the wall and let the silence do its work. My father started with the usual phrases people use when they are late. I was under pressure. I didn't know how to react. I was shocked. Then he stopped because even he could hear how small that sounded after everything. Finally, he said, "I was cruel because your success made me feel unnecessary." It was the first honest thing he had ever said to me about us. I told him that his apology mattered less than what it revealed. I told him I had not become valuable on the day a room full of strangers stood up for me. I was valuable the night he called me trash. I was valuable at 19 in that apartment over the laundromat. I was valuable every time I paid a bill he never knew came from me. He cried then, though not in a way that made me want to comfort him. Ryan spoke next, voice shaking. He admitted he had built half his identity by feeling superior to me, and when that collapsed, he tried to borrow my success the way he had borrowed everything else. Brooke apologized again, this time in front of all of us. My mother said she had spent her whole life making peace with strong men by sacrificing inconvenient truth, and it had cost her a daughter. I listened. I believed parts of them. I did not reward any of them with absolution. I told them the only relationship I was willing to have moving forward was a limited one built on respect, honesty, and distance. No more money, no more family access to my business, no more emotional rewriting after the fact, no surprise visits, no calling me selfish for protecting myself. Brooke could call me, my mother could text. Ryan would need time and consistency before I considered anything more than civility. My father and I would not pretend. If he wanted to speak to me, he would do it without authority, without entitlement, without expecting me to ease his guilt. He nodded like a man learning a language too late to sound natural in it. And that was that. No cinematic reunion, no miracle healing, just consequences, boundaries, and a truth none of them could put back in the box. I flew home to Charleston the next morning. Home. That word finally meant a place I had chosen, not a room where I had been evaluated. A week later, I hosted another workshop in my studio. Women came in carrying samples, notebooks, fear, ambition, and unfinished plans. June slept by the door while I taught pricing, scale, founder psychology, and why shame is one of the most expensive things an entrepreneur can carry. I expanded the scholarship program I had started quietly the year before for students building businesses outside traditional paths. Brooke began volunteering legal hours for it. Ryan sent his first handwritten apology instead of a text. My mother mailed back a box of old-school photos with a note that simply said, "You were never the problem." My father wrote once a month, short letters with no self-pity, just facts, accountability. and the awkward effort of a man who had finally learned that love does not survive humiliation. Sometimes I answered. Sometimes I didn't. That was my choice now. One evening, months later, I stood barefoot on the back steps of my Charleston cottage, watching the tide darken under the last light. The house was quiet except for June breathing nearby, and the faint buzz of laughter from neighbors 2 doors down. I thought about that birthday dinner, about the girl who walked out saying, "Okay, fine," because arguing would have made her smaller in a room already committed to misunderstanding her. I used to think revenge meant making people suffer the way they made me suffer. I know better now. The real revenge was letting the truth stand still long enough for them to see themselves in it. The real revenge was building a life so solid their approval became irrelevant. The real revenge was that when they finally came looking for my value, I no longer needed them to confirm it. I looked out at the water and understood something with a peace I had never felt in Indianapolis. I did not need my family to save me, validate me, or choose me correctly. I had already done the hardest part myself. I had chosen me first. What happens when you finally place your worth above blood, guilt, and old roles that were designed to keep you small? Have you ever been called a failure by the very people who benefited from your strength? Tell me in the comments because I read everyone.
We truly appreciate your support and your time. This video is fictional and not based on real events, and it was created only for storytelling, entertainment, and educational reflection. We hope the lesson reminds you that being kind is a beautiful strength, but staying where your kindness is constantly abused is not something you owe to anyone.